got another modern perspective this week at Grimflixels. Cold on the heels of my overview of the making of Karateka, I bring you my thoughts on Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, also developed and published by Digital Eclipse, and the second title in their Gold Master series. What is the Gold Master series? That's explained in a fair amount of detail in the making of Karateka video, so best you head off and watch that one first. I'll wait. This new title was released fairly recently on March 14th, 2024, recently at least at the time of recording, and like the making of Karateka before it, it's well worth your time. Let's find out why. Quite simply, Llamasoft is a software developer. Founded in the early 1980s by Jeff Minter, also known as Yak, or at least he was back in the day, Llamasoft is very unique in that it's always been primarily a one-man band, so to speak. And that means that, more than any other studio, Llamasoft games are uniquely identifiable by Mr. Minter's own eccentricities, particularly his fondness for ruminant mammals, aka hairy animals that eat grass. Hence the nickname Yak. Circle of life or something. For this reason, many of his games feature these cute little creatures who often find themselves in some intergalactic predicament they need to find their way out of, generally by way of lasers. While this is an incredible overgeneralization of Llamasoft's games, it's also kind of accurate. In addition, Minter's games tend to also feature many varying colours, shapes and sounds, lending them a kind of psychedelic quality that feeds into that overall uniqueness. Is all of this a good thing? Well, it depends, really. Llamasoft games won't appeal to everyone. Even if you are a fan of Minter's games, there'll likely be one or two that just don't gel with you, and that's alright. In fact, he often makes games for himself anyway, and sometimes is surprised to find that the games also resonate with players, and that's something I learned from the documentary component of this title. Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, is, like the making of Karateka before it, a documentary of sorts, an interactive exhibit, if you will, but where the making of Karateka focused primarily on the development of one title, Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, tells Jeff's story up until around the early 2000s. It does go beyond to a degree, but the sections covering recent developments are somewhat short and lacking in detail because the point is to capture the pre-digital age, at least that's the point in my estimation. Through this documentary you'll learn how Mr. Minter got started, when and how he started to see some success, as well as how that may or may not have affected his process over the years. More than that though, it includes many of the games referenced. 42 of them in fact, some of which represent different versions of the same game on different platforms or across the hazy shores of time. Most of these, much like the Llamasoft catalogue in general, are shoot-em-ups, but not like what you might expect from that genre. His most well-known title, and the one that likely saved his business in the mid-1990s, and one that you'll learn all about as part of the documentary, was Tempest 2000. This is one of my favourite games ever, and it's included in the collection, which is great because it was released on the Atari Jaguar and they aren't easily come by. Yes, I do have a copy myself, but not complete in box, sadly. One day. Anyway, what exactly can you expect from this new title from Digital Eclipse? Really depends, to be honest. While the content covers much more ground when compared to the making of Karateka, it somehow feels a bit shorter, or at least it feels as if it has less content overall. Perhaps this is a reflection of the crazy amount of records that Jordan Mechner kept while making his games, or it may simply be a reflection of the sheer amount of time that's covered in this newer title. It's the same amount of content overall, but spread out over a longer time frame. I don't know. Whatever the case, I did feel that it didn't dig much more than skin deep, but it didn't really leave me feeling unfulfilled. However, it's really Minter's games that make this collection, and as a fan of them myself, I enjoy this collection far more than that of Karateka. Your mileage may vary. Many of these titles are quite old and can be considered simplistic by today's standards, but to be honest, that can be said of much of Llamasoft's back catalogue. These are primarily arcade-style titles, after all. If all you want is to quickly see and get a feel for Llamasoft titles, watch all the videos, read all the content and look at all the pictures, you'll probably get about 4 hours worth of entertainment, give or take, which is reasonable given the cost. And for those of you interested in video game history and preservation, there's plenty here to enjoy, but it's definitely not an exhaustive overview. Again, there are 42 titles in this collection, so I'm not going to give you a review of each or we'd be here all day. Starting with his early titles, 3D, Centipede, Ratman, Super Deflex, City Bomb, Rocks 3 and Turbo Flex. These are all quite simple by today's standards, and even for me who does love older titles and the nostalgia that comes with it, these are still a little too simple for me at times, except for perhaps Centipede. Still a very simple, unofficial version of the popular arcade game, but very interesting nonetheless, even just at a cursory glance. As Minter started to find his groove, we saw titles like Abductor, Grid Runner, Andy's Attack, Rocks 64, Attack of the Mutant Camels, Headbangers Heaven, and Laser Zone. Indeed, this was where Jeff started to find his groove and refine the kind of games that he wanted to make. Several of these games are still very playable, especially Grid Runner, of course, along with Mutant Camels and Laser Zone. However, there are still much better titles in the compilation, at least from my perspective. From there on, we started to see some of his early successes: Grid Runner 2, Hover Bother, Metagalactic Llama's Battle at the Edge of Time, and yes, that is the real name of the game, Revenge of the Mutant Camels, Hellgate, Sheep in Space, Ancipital, Mama Llama, and Battlix. Where Grid Runner put Jeff on the map, at least in the UK, it was these titles that really started to make him money. I've put these in a separate section of their own as they're definitely the boost that he needed at the time, but many of these are some of Minter's best, particularly Hover Bother, the Llama and Camel games, and Ancipital. Some of them are incredibly insane though, so consider yourself warned. Mama Llama and Battlix, for example, both of these require some mental gymnastics to even understand what's going on, so make good use of those digital instruction manuals. Next up we have the light synths, Psychedelia and Color Space. Honestly, these aren't for me, but they're here. These aren't the only light synths that Minter played around with. Probably his best known is the music visualizer that was included on the Xbox 360, but when I think of that I get sad because I remember another title sadly missing from this collection, likely due to licensing issues, and that's Space Giraffe. You can't win them all, I guess. The light synths are a fun distraction, if nothing else. Next up, some of his best games from his back catalogue: Iridis Alpha, Attack of the Mutant Camels 89, Revenge of the Mutant Camels 2, Super Grid Runner, Llamatron 2112, and Tempest 2000. These are, in my opinion, the best original Minter games in this collection. Each one is still an absolute joy to play, and although all are wonderful, Llamatron 2112 and Tempest 2000 will remain my favourites because to me, they're absolutely perfect. Not to mention the fact that this was the easiest way to play Llamatron 2112 using twin sticks on modern controllers. It's not the only way, but it works out of the box without tweaking. You'll notice this list also includes as a special surprise the unreleased and unfinished, but most importantly playable, Conix multi-system version of Attack of the Mutant Camels from 1989. In fact, not only is it playable, but it's also probably the best version of the game, effectively a better balanced version of the Atari 8-bit version, and I wish it had at least been completed and released on the Atari Jaguar, at the very least, as, well, I was surprised to find I played this one the most out of all the older titles, and it really has that Jaguar look and feel. And lastly, there's Grid Runner Remastered, a remake coded by Mike Mika of Digital Eclipse. This captures the look and feel of the Commodore 64 version of the game while sprucing things up for modern players. It responds better to the controls, looks prettier, and is a little more intuitive, but in the end, it's much the same game. And why is that? Because it was already a great game in the first place. This may just be the very best way to play it, depending on your own personal preference, of course. Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, is both very similar and very different to the making of Karateka before it. One feels very intimate. It's the story of one man making one game. The other, Llamasoft, if you aren't following, is much more of a celebration of one man's career. And given Minter's games feel like a party themselves, this celebration is almost like a festival, all centered on Jeff Minter and the wonderful world he lives in. Based on my love of both Tempest 2000 and Llamatron 2112, I was very excited when it was first announced. And now, having played through all 42 titles and having watched the whole documentary, I'm satisfied. It's far from perfect. It feels a little light on details, and in many ways it's more of a summary of Minter's career, especially when compared to the making of Karateka. But where the documentary may lack in detail, the collection more than makes up for it. There are several games here that I'll come back to from time to time, and they are really well captured here in terms of their presentation and emulation. At the very least, it's a digital and engaging record of a time gone by, but at its best, It's a collection of Llamasoft's best titles, consumable on modern platforms. And personally, I can't ask for more than that. Now I'm excited to hear what will get the Gold Master treatment next. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by Dim Pixels, and hopefully I'll see you around again. Let's play all the games.